Item on the agenda, confirm the minutes of the council meeting which took place on the 5th of December 2017 and of the extraordinary meeting held on the 19th of December. Are you agreed that I sign these as a correct record? I'll sign these later. The last meeting was a mere 9 minutes long. That's a target, isn't it? Mr. Taylor, are there any apologies for absence?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Apologies received from councillors Coburn, Jim Edwards, John Gray, Peter Martin, Kika Miralese, Stephen Reynolds, Stuart and Jeanette Stennett, John Ward, John Williamson and Ross Welland.
In accordance with the Waverley Code of Conduct, do members have any non-pecuniary or disclosable pecuniary interests to declare? Mr. Taylor?
No declarations have been raised in advance, Mr. Mayor.
Any other declarations? No. So, on to Mayor's announcements. Thank you to all the councillors who took part in the bowling evening. It was a great success. It raised a total of £2,400 for the two charities, which is an excellent result. Sadly, Waverley lost by 86 points. And one announcement from committee services. There is a possibility that the JPC tomorrow will be postponed. So please check your emails tomorrow for confirmation as to whether or not it is going ahead. And just one other thing, we can still accommodate one or two more members at the charity dinner. Now, one question has been received from Mr. Kutzel of Godalming. The question and answer have been circulated. Mr. Taylor, have any questions been received from members?
None received, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Have any motions been received from members?
None received.
Right. In view of the public interest in the local plan, I've agreed to reorder the agenda to take the minutes of the special executive meeting held earlier this evening at this point, it was formerly item 10B on the agenda. Have we a poltergeist? So, Leader, please move the minutes of the special executive. The minutes have been tabled.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I am pleased to move the minutes of the executive held earlier this evening, and I believe I have a seconder.
Pleased to second, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, the meeting earlier this evening, which was a special executive, was held to consider one item, and that item is the adoption of Part 1 of Waverley Borough Council's local plan. Members will see the details of those minutes held earlier this evening, which have two recommendations to Council. Mr. Mayor, members and members of the public, by way of a short introduction to this particular item, think it fair to say that we all recognise that this evening we are at a significant milestone in the life of Waverley Borough Council's local plan. Without a local plan, local authorities clearly have far less control over development, where decision management decisions have to take into account the most up-to-date policy and strategy position. We ourselves, in all parts of this borough, have experienced firsthand, many of us in our own wards, borough-wide, the problems and the issues of not having a sound, up-to-date local plan. Earlier versions of the plan were withdrawn in 2007 and again in 2013. As members, we've had to make very difficult and challenging decisions to come to where we are this evening. It's important to remember, and I know the portfolio holder will want to enlarge on this further, but it is really important to remember that this plan has gone through a very robust examination, through a long period of time last year, through periods of consultation, and before us we have the plan as it is tonight. And what I would also remind members is that the plan and the decision on the plan that you're being asked to make tonight is on a plan that includes all the main modifications as recommended by the planning inspector. He found the plan to be sound, but critically only with the inclusion of the main modifications. So to be absolutely clear, the plan that we submitted to government in December of 2016, without those modifications, was and remains unsound. It is only with the inclusion of all the main modifications recommended that that plan will be sound. And whilst I know that this is a difficult decision before members tonight, actually, what do we want? Do we want to take back control? Do we want to have appropriate plan-led development? Or do we want a free-for-all in our borough? And I think it's a very clear decision that we all have to make tonight. Mr. Mayor, thank you. And I'm sure that there are a number of other members who would like to speak on this item.
Are there any speakers? Councillor Adams.
I know. Mr. Mayor, thank you. Clearly I'm pleased that our local plan part 1 is being presented for adoption today. For me, it represents the culmination of 4 years' effort. It took Councillor Knowles several requests before I agreed to take it on. I have to thank Councillor Knowles for the total support he gave me as portfolio holder. He encouraged initiative and always worked with me. In 2013, the NPPF was still new and being interpreted by different inspectors inconsistently. This streamlined planning system was followed about 15 months later by just 900 pages of planning guidance, which opened up even more opportunities for interpretation. In fact, only 8 months before 2015 election did the stream of changes slow to a trickle. It had turned into a long and tortuous project. After a while, a detailed project management plan was created and maintained for most of the project. This gradually improved estimating for all the various work streams. It could be, if required, be a good foundation for the estimating of future any project review. The major underestimate we made related to traffic movements and the necessary infrastructure improvements, which took more than twice as long to clarify as anticipated. It also required the employment of a contractor to supplement Surrey County Council's activities. The technical knowledge behind this plan has been provided by a dedicated planning policy team, and we should be grateful to the officers led by Graham Parrott supported by Ian Motchell and Matthew Ellis, who have stayed the whole course of this development. The total team, though roughly half the size of Guildford, have achieved this outcome a year earlier than theirs. I appreciate the plan has a number of features which are disappointing to many of our residents. It was always going to be the case. The government has made the rules to have too many more homes built than our residents believe necessary. There are strong planning guidelines and landscape constraints focusing where those homes should go. Although we came to an agreement with Woking, the MPPF clearly states that housing market areas should accommodate the whole of their need if possible. So the inspector was entitled to take the very short-term view as he chose to do. I'm delighted that he has recognised the value of the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan in his report and given it his support. He also recognised the contribution Dunsfold Park could make and the consequent relief of even more homes in our towns and villages. The figure of 2,600 is the maximum he considers possible to build in this plan period. Adoption now not only curtails speculative development, but enables the team to concentrate on finding funding for the significant infrastructure requirements identified with certainty in the IDP. Certainty is also provided for the various neighbourhood plans under development throughout the borough. It has been announced that a significantly revised MPPF will be presented at the end of March. There are no indications that there will be any relief on housing numbers for planning authorities, in fact, quite the contrary. So any delay in adopting this plan would not only provide additional unknown uncertainties, but also likely additional costs to our residents. The plan could not have reached this stage without the continued support of you, my colleagues, who, even under significant pressure from your constituents, have understood the reasons why some unpopular choices have been made for greater good. Thank you all for supporting me over the last 4 years and making this difficult task achievable. Finally, I would like to thank those councillors who went out of their way to assist my travel during my medically enforced driving ban. Councillors Denis, King, Jenny Ellis, and especially Councillors Coburn and Isherwood. Without your help in the first few weeks of last year, my job would have been extremely difficult to fulfil. Best of luck to Councillor Storey. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. And Councillor Leigh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to thank the leader for her summary, which is, in my view, absolutely spot on. But if you will just indulge me, I'd like to say a few words that essentially say the same things, but they are in my words. So we have before us the new local plan, Part 1, covering our planning period up to 2032. Now, this plan has been determined as sound, therefore, it meets the planning criteria to be adopted by all councils that is set out in the MPPF, Planning Policy for Traveller Sites and Government Circulars. The importance of a sound plan cannot be overstated since the original submission in 2013 was declared unsound and rejected. So for the last 5 years, officers and members have worked tirelessly in preparing this plan, looking as fairly as possible over the whole borough. And I congratulate them and the inspector even that has achieved this milestone. Throughout this time, the advantage has been with the developers because of the lack of appropriate policies and strategy to address the increased housing numbers being forced upon us. This has been proved by a number of appeals lodged by the developers that have gone against our recommendations. Defending appeals costs money, and when the costs do not achieve the desired result, it is not at all satisfactory to the borough and its residents. Now, the number of dwellings, their locations, and the consequent need for appropriate infrastructure are matters of legitimate concern to each of the councillors in this chamber. And it is probable that not one of us is satisfied with elements of the plan. I'm not, both from a Milford ward perspective and, if I can be selfish, a personal perspective, since I will be having housing to the rear, to the side, and to the front across the narrow country road. But I have to wear a Waverley hat. Interestingly, I think, I received a letter on behalf of a self-interested group, laying out the problems in their area, which indeed are real, and we will be seeking to address when applications are presented. But the person went on to say that the increased housing that he was talking about would you believe, be better located in Milford, since we only have 180 dwellings, which was an out-of-date figure, since it now stands at 480. Now, it has been suggested that this plan be rejected for further work until we have the right plan. Well, a right or perfect plan is a totally unattainable objective, since it would not be possible to satisfy everybody's specific concerns. So in my view, there is no point in wasting further time by rejecting this sound plan. I therefore commend this plan for the acceptance by the Council to give us back a control over our planning decisions that we have lost up to now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leigh. Councillor Foryszewski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again, that nobody loathes more than I do what happened to Cranley. It's really unfair that without any protection, Cranley was given the lion's share along with Farnham. And I hate to say, you have destroyed our village, our beautiful village and our beautiful green fields. And I think that's a travesty, I really do. And to add insult to injury, an inspector has put a further 200 into Cranley. However, I cannot argue with the inspector. He found the plan to be sound. We witter on about taking Wokin's unmet needs and other criticisms of the plan. But, having said that, had a previous administration listened to the backbenchers, we wouldn't be where we are now. Let's not kid ourselves. An inspector has found the plan sound. The number won't go away and it won't go down. No part 1 equals no part 2 equals no plan. It's been through examination, it's been through consultation, and it's been through scrutiny. I personally have lived with this baby for an awful long time. This baby's now grown up. 2002 was the last time we had an adopted local plan. 15 years on, don't we think that we should have another one to safeguard us? Like it or loathe it, it's an opportunity to take back control. It's too late for Cranley, but it's not too late for the rest of the borough. A local plan is long overdue. A lot has changed since 2002. Any attempt to defer, delay or derail puts us at risk. It actually puts this borough at risk. It's not a sensible conclusion to think that a delay is going to help anybody. All it's going to lead us to is more speculative development, inappropriate development, and more developer-led planning. Having spent hours in this chamber with my colleagues, we have fought tirelessly and hard to defend our village, but we lost. And it wasn't for the want of trying. And it's not the fault of officers or anybody else. It's the fault of we had developers out there pecking away, looking to what was available, knowing that we had no protection. No adoption of this plan is a backward step. If I'm going to continue to fight in this chamber, I want something to fight with, and a local plan will allow me to do that. An inspector appointed by the Secretary of State has found the plan to be sound upon examination. I didn't find it sound. An inspector did. What do we want? Do we want to go forward and not have a plan? or do we want to go forward and have a plan? I don't like it any more than anybody else, but I accept that going forward we have to have this plan. Anybody who doesn't want it is putting us at risk. And I would actually congratulate the leader for having the courage of her conviction to bring this to council and actually get it hopefully adopted this evening, because that's what we need as a borough. So whilst I don't like it, I 100% support it because it gives me the ammunition I need. And I'd also congratulate Elizabeth Sims and her team, because rather than sitting back and doing nothing in 2013, you actually got together, done something and produced a plan. Stay ahead of the game, because if you don't, you might just be taking Guildford's unmet needs if their plan goes ahead of ours, which is what happened to Woking. So let's adopt this plan tonight and not let's waste any more time. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Councillor Foryszewski. And we're moving on to Councillor Hargreaves.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Of course, I support the adoption of an up-to-date local plan. As a resident of Farnham, you would expect me to sympathise with the disappointment of the hundreds of residents who wrote the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan and the thousands more who supported it at referendum. There has been so much nonsense spoken recently by those who know little about the Localism Act, Save Policy NRM6, or the South East Plan, neighbourhood planning in general, or the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan itself. By law, almost every new dwelling in Farnham needs to provide mitigation for harm to the Thames Basin Heath Special Protection Area in the form of SANGs, suitable, accessible, natural green space. As things stand, there is not enough SANG provision to deliver even the earlier allocation of 2,330 dwellings in Farnham. Natural England did not support an immediate increase in the allocation to Farnham, stating that there was no certainty that an increase could be delivered. That is why Farnham sought a later review of its plan, rather than face an immediate further allocation of 450 dwellings. That is why residents are upset by Waverley's decision. The neighbourhood plan has allocated all available brownfield sites, together with selected suitable greenfield sites. It is hoped that there will be enough capacity in Farnham Park or on selected sites to enable developers to buy into SANG provision or provide their own over the life of the plan. However, because of the uncertainty over delivery, the neighbourhood plan has a need for a later review written into its text. It was hoped that Waverley Executive would support its only made neighbourhood plan, as other boroughs have, and enable the extra sites to be identified later in the plan period, together with further SANGs if necessary. This would have provided certainty of delivery on a variety of sites. Certain greenfield sites might be able to provide their own bespoke SAN, but this will be impossible for brownfield sites in the future. If new provision can be found, Farnham could face the prospect of another moratorium on residential development on brownfield sites in the town centre and elsewhere. Farnham is feeling bruised, but is definitely not beaten. The neighbourhood plan is set to deliver in excess of its original target within its first 10 years, and the Town Council has begun a new call for sites. I would encourage landowners of brownfield sites, which might be available for residential development over the next 15 years, to put their sites in for consideration now. I welcome the new plan, but remain convinced that our towns and our parishes must be consulted on all matters relating to sites in their area. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hargreaves. And next is Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Personally, I really do believe that it is vital for us to agree the recommendations this evening and to adopt the plan. Having the plan in place will, I believe, make a significant help to us, be of significant help to us when we are considering planning applications and when we are defending our decisions at appeal. However, whilst much of the plan is excellent and well considered, I'm hugely disappointed, I have to say, about the lack of commitment to improvement of the infrastructure in Waverley and in particular to Cranley. I am very aware of my wider responsibility to the whole of the borough, but I've been representing Cranley for quite some considerable time. And I do believe that over the last few years, Cranley, and in particular my ward, which is Cranley West, has received far more than its fair share of permitted large-scale developments, which will change forever the very nature of the area. And I believe that the lack of an up-to-date plan has been very detrimental to Cranley, as well as to other parts of the borough. Following the inspector's report, the borough is very unfortunately faced with an increased number of properties and being required to accommodate the shortfall in Woking and perhaps an overflow from London. That doesn't sit very well with me or with my fellow residents. Cranley, and I'm sorry to concentrate on Cranley, or appear to, and the surrounding area already suffers from very serious problems with the infrastructure, or the lack of infrastructure. And unfortunately, there appears to have been very little reference or consideration given to these problems by the inspector in his report, or even, I'm sorry to say, much of the plan that we are considering. I'm not alone in having made regular reference to the infrastructure problems already experienced in Cranley. But we must seriously understand that these issues need to be addressed before all of the properties already permitted are built and indeed occupied. With the very best will in the world, these issues cannot be resolved overnight, and in terms of planning and financing, etc., some will take several years. And it won't be the developers who are suffering, but the people of Cranley, be they existing residents or new residents. Very briefly, because it has all been said before, Cranley is currently only served by already severely congested B roads and country lanes, and this will get worse as hundreds of new residents have to get in their cars to go to work. And that actually raises a further issue. Where really are these people going to work? The new property is already permitted for Cranley would depend on the sewage treatment plant in Elmbridge Road, which has been experiencing severe problems over several years, and the stream that the effluent is pumped into has developed serious flow problems and sometimes ceases to flow at all. I'm reliably informed that 29.6% of all Cranley's drinking water supply network is made up from old asbestos cement piping, which has come to the end of its life. And we suffer regular burst water mains. And on a personal issue, I was for 20 hours without water this Christmas Eve. Unfortunately, I realise I've overstepped the mark, and I do apologise. These two issues are really very, very serious, and I hope that Waverley will take some steps soon to address these matters and support the people of Cranley. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would also like to agree with my fellow councillors from Cranley and my fellow councillor from Cranley West, which I'm the representative for Cranley West Ward. I have huge reservations, especially as mentioned already, about the amount of Woking's housing unmet need we are having to take. In Cranley, we're going to probably have to take 2 years, another 2 times 83 of the unmet need from Woking, and then about a year's worth of unmet need from London as well, in addition to the original allocation we had in the local plan. As my fellow councillor Ellis has mentioned, we have severe problems with wastewater infrastructure and water quality in our local river, and we also have a lack of employment land as well. I am very concerned about the projected housing delivery we are agreeing to in the local plan. And that's no fault of the councils, but I think we have little control over the actual delivery of the housing. The developers will deliver the housing, I think, in accordance with their own needs rather than in accordance with the needs of the borough and in accordance with people's housing need. I think that in agreeing this delivery and agreeing the numbers, I am not sure that we are going to be able to meet approximately 1,200 times housing per year. And I think that I'm afraid that I have reservations about it. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. And next I have Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, fellow councillors. First of all, I also just want to praise the sheer amount of work that's gone into this process from the officers and everybody involved. Whatever my own feelings on the content, this was clearly not a small undertaking from anybody involved. However, I'm pleasantly not bound to follow the leader, as many other people in this room. Taking back control is a phrase I've just heard too many times from too many Conservatives on too many subjects recently. And I just can't shake the feeling that we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. It's been made very clear to councillors by officers and the executive that there are significant risks of non-adoption and the absolute certain apocalyptic doom that would follow if we don't pass it. It's been made equally clear that the plan and its fundamental points would hold significant weight and precedent regardless of whether we passed it or not. Now, I attended the ONS last week, and what startled me most were the comments of the various councillors that also didn't like this, as we're seeing tonight. That they, in some cases, were only voting for it because they believe they were almost certain most of the development wouldn't actually happen. Though, of course, at the same time, they are about to vote for Greenbelt being taken out of Godalming in Binscombe and in my own ward up in Aarons Hill. And these are provisions that came in as part of the major modifications, which we barely discussed at that ONS because people were so, I'm going to say, adverse to criticism, but they did not want to really scrutinise those modifications because they felt they couldn't do anything about them. The inspector expects those numbers to be deliverable where the plan says. So if you're going to vote for it and the inspector's word is gospel, then we have to consider that those green belts allocations will be used for housing. So either you agree with this or you don't. And either way, the door is firmly open to development on those sites once you take it out of the green belt. Now, I personally have no objection to reasonable modifications to that green belt, but I do have objections when there are other alternatives that we should be using first. But we're here today because successive incarnations of this council have failed to deliver a local plan and now sits here essentially with a gun to councillors' heads telling them to pass this or face the consequences. Many of you have also complained bitterly about the uncontrolled development in the borough whilst holding a near total majority to construct and pass a local plan in those 15 years and since the last plan period. That's 15 years. Almost all the issues which members have bemoaned here tonight have happened on your watch, and you are all collectively responsible for what has happened, however much you disagree with them. All of it. By not having that plan for 15 years, we've missed out on a colossal variety of SIL money, which I've had estimates to be in the millions. But that SIL money is only useful if it's managed properly, the money goes to the right places, and if it's actually used to benefit the community. Finally, I'll conclude. Many of you are voting for something that you do not wish to be realised, and I'm not at all surprised to be listening to so many members tonight upset with a plan that you are subsequently about to all line up and vote for. and this is almost entirely because you've all failed to get this done and have now simply run out of time. So I would urge those members with reservations to actually act upon them. Now, I'm not going to vote against this because I believe that there are issues too that we need to do, and I'm going to abstain. So I urge you, if you've got reservations, which you've all made clear, to think about that and to act upon it accordingly. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Just one moment, Councillor Frost. Members of the public, this is a meeting held in public. It is not a public meeting. You are not to intervene with applause or shouts of hear, hear. Councillor Frost, did you wish to raise a point?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was really a point to do with the behaviour of the members of the public behind us. It was quite clear that our member here, our new member, was playing to the audience, and we are here, actually. Do you see what I mean? Thank you for bringing it to their attention that this is not a public meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Frost. Councillor Macleod, and then Jerry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For many reasons, I would very much like to support this local plan. Many of the councillors who have spoken have views that I respect, and I totally endorse the points about all the great deal of work that's gone into it. However, I have some very big concerns about this local plan. The two things I would like to say about it is, first, it's not actually particularly local, is it? That it's very much imposed on us from above, and it's had very detrimental effects on the neighbourhood plan in Farnham, and I was also advised at the recent briefing meeting on the Elstead local plan. Second, it's not really a whole plan, is it? That a plan consists not just of what you've got to do, but how you're going to achieve it. Now, our plan is full of a lot of detail about what's got to be done, but there's very little about how it should be achieved. And the reason for that is that we've got very little control over how it should be achieved. The people who control it are very much, in terms of the housing numbers, very much the developers, and very much in terms of infrastructure, other bodies like County Council, and the other infrastructure providers. Now, the local plan inspector said there's no convincing reason why 590 a year should not be delivered sustainably. I'm not sure he's actually looked at what's happened in this local plan already. We're actually a quarter way through this plan, actually. At the end of last December, we had done 4 3/4 years of a 19-year plan. And what's actually happened in these 4 1/4 years is that we've actually delivered, we should have delivered 2,803 houses, and we've actually delivered 1,204. So we've delivered 43% of the requirement. But in the same time, the council has approved 4,345 houses, which is 155% of the requirement. So here we are as Waverley doing our bit, but the developers are not doing their bit, and we don't have any control over that. And my point about this local plan is that it's not actually going to happen. What the inspector is asking us to do is produce 11,210 houses over this period. And that's not just houses. That means we're going to be something like 28,000 extra people living in Waverley, something like 17,000 extra cars, and 7,000 extra school-aged children. Are we going to be able to achieve that? Are we be able to cope with that? The simple fact of the matter is that we're not actually. So what should we be doing about this? Because I'd like to finish on a positive note if I can. We shouldn't actually be accepting this. We should actually be saying to government, this is just not possible. The government talks about a broken housing market. They're actually the ones who are breaking it, actually. We do have power as local authorities. We should be getting the people behind us. We should be working with other local authorities and fixing the housing system, because it's not actually working. And that's what we need to recognise. The fundamental problem with this local plan, it just won't happen. That if you look at the trajectory that's shown, and it expects us in 2 or 3 years' time to be producing something like 5.5 times the number of houses in 1 year that Waverley has ever produced before. Over the whole period of the plan, we're expected to produce something like 2.5 times the number of houses that we'd produced in the past. And in terms of the taking back control point, I'd like to make the point it's not actually going to work, sadly. I've attended a lot of the appeals, and one of the things the developers keep telling the inspectors that Waverley has a persistent record of under-delivery. There's something like 7 years of under-delivery. It's now up to 9 years, and that's going to continue, and it's actually going to get worse. We're not going to be able to keep control in the way suggested, because the developers are not going to build the houses that we require for that to happen. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. And next I have Councillor Band.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I too would like to join in congratulating the officers and the work that has gone on in producing this document and getting us to the stage we are today. However, like other councillors, I have severe reservations about the recommendations generated through the process and incorporated by the inspector in his report. However, I think at this point in time, and looking at the decisions in front of us tonight, those reservations are barely relevant any longer. The reality is the inspector's report is in the public domain. That will be the guideline for any developer coming forward in the future for any future development in the borough. We have to recognise that. And so if we adopt the local plan, and I will be supporting the recommendation, we do at least gather some protection. That is the maximum amount of additional protection we can now achieve. We have protection through that, and we also have the ability to start at least making contributions to the infrastructure, the community infrastructure levy. I think both of these things are of benefit to us and to our residents in this borough. So reluctantly, we are where we are. The reality is we have two recommendations before us, and frankly, I think it's a no-brainer. We have to seek what protection we can and adopt the recommendation. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Councillor Band. Councillor Frost.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Mayor. Well, I'd like to correct something that Councillor Follows has said. I've been on this council a long time, and I seem to recall the first local plan being under the Liberal Democrat administration, and that failed. So we are where we are. I don't like all of this plan. I don't like what it's doing to Cranley, and I don't like what it's doing to Farnham. But the fact is, we are here now. There are benefits from it. And we are, in fact, hearing from people and having long letters from people who have, in fact, got vested interests in what goes on. And I personally don't want to find that in the next 5 years, I'm still discussing how many houses we have at Dunsfold or how many houses we have at Whitley. I want some protection for this borough. And the one thing we've forgotten today is that when we are looking at what's happening, that we are responsible for the planning applications. This is just the overall plan of what should happen. But when the applications come before us, we need to make sure we are vigilant, we know what we're doing, and we get the best out of them that we can for our constituents. And that, I think, is very important. And we mustn't forget that. And we seem to forget we still have power in our hands to do something for our residents. This is not just, oh, there's the local plan, right, we'll rubber stamp the application. And we've been very successful with some applications in Cranley in getting them turned over and also getting the inspector to agree with us that they shouldn't happen. And we've still got that power, and we must use it. The only thing I am a bit concerned about is that we have an officer, Mr. Parrott. What's he going to do now? To my knowledge, he spent most of his time very successfully working on and developing the plan that we have in front of us. I will be supporting the plan. We are in a situation where we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't. So for me, whatever protection this plan can give the people of Waverley, I will be supporting it. But remember, colleagues, you agree the planning applications. And if you don't like it, say so. And I've sat in this council chamber when we've been looking at planning applications and being told, well, we can't go to appeal because it's going to cost us money. I don't care. What my job is to look at those applications for the people I represent. And if it's going to cost us money, sometimes we get the money back. So, Mr. Mayor, I will be supporting what we have in front of us, but let's not forget it's taken us a long time to get here, and let's get some protection for our borough.
Thank you, Councillor Frost. And now Councillor Hyman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Frost is certainly right about the we're damned if we do. But we don't have to. Councillor Follows and Councillor Macleod have certainly saved me trying to cram a lot of things in rather quickly. But I'm not surprised that some of the other members are slightly underinformed, because when you look at all the information we've been given, we see quite a lot about the risks of non-adoption. We see quite a lot about the benefits of adoption. I can't find anywhere in these papers the other side of the story, the benefits of non-adoption and the risks of adoption, funnily enough. Thankfully, I think some of the councillors do understand, but we know this is a rubber stamping exercise this evening. One of the things that isn't in the report there is Natural England have an outstanding objection on two grounds. And what they say is that Natural England are currently of the view that the Local Plan Part 1 with the proposed main modifications is not legally compliant and does not meet all of the tests of soundness, namely whether it's effective and consistent with national policy. Natural England believes there's scope for further work to deal with the remaining issues, etc., etc. And whilst officers have responded to that, saying that that's been sorted out, I've got an email from Mark Turner at Natural England, because I left a message on his answer phone and told him my concerns and asked, is this an outstanding objection? He said, thank you for contacting us about our concerns. I can confirm our concerns remain outstanding, but I note the inspector has given them little weight in the local plan examination report, and goes into further details that I won't to explain the depth of it, but basically it's that we can't complete an appropriate assessment because we don't have sufficient information. Now, you will remember, I'm sure, that in 2006 we had exactly the same problem. The inspector, John Mattox it was, forced Waverley to withdraw the local plan on the basis Waverley couldn't answer the question that he put, which was called the supplementary question on AA and mitigation. His question was, how can I be certain that the mitigation measures will be effective in terms of the Wadensee judgment, that's the overriding law? And, of course, we still can't get an answer to that. I've been trying madly, as quite a lot of people have put in a lot of hard work over the past couple of days in order to try and get me an answer to that question. And where is the convincing objective evidence? Of course, we all know it doesn't exist. We know that Natural England tried to put some together for us a couple of years ago, but ended up throwing it away because if they publish the document, and this is what it tells us in the Joint Strategic Partnership Board minutes, if they publish that document, then it would make their position harder. Okay? I think we should be obeying the law, frankly. I am concerned, certainly, for what will happen for Cranley, and we know that Habitats actually protects about 3/4 of the borough, right over the 281, and we've got Shamley Green, Ewhurst and Cranley, certainly who don't have Habitats protection. There are other environmental protections that might be useful to them, but they haven't pressed those hard enough as far as I can tell. Yes, the council did try to destroy Farnham, and we fought. Cranley turned their back and didn't realise it was coming. They got destroyed, and now it's back to destroy Farnham again. And with this local plan here, it's the rest of the borough too. The question perhaps we need to ask is, could we have a worse plan? This is excessive, unrealistic. It ignores the environmental law that protects the borough. But we are here to rubber stamp it, people. I think it's a planning decision. I don't think it should be allowed to be predetermined, but I know everybody has. So. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. There's a lot more we could say about this, but it's going to be rubber stamped, isn't it? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A few points have been made regarding the details contained within the local plan. I will be supporting the plan because it seems to me that the choice is fairly binary. Either we have some control or we have none. Put another way, those voting against the plan are voting against their residents having any control whatsoever on developments within their area of the borough. Now, some members believe the plan does not address certain issues. Some members believe the plan disproportionately favours one area over another. Some members just don't like it. But even taking this into account, without a plan, our ability to control development is pretty much zero. Put simply, and paraphrasing General Patton, the worst plan in the world violently executed is infinitely superior to no plan. Therefore, I urge you all to support the plan because without it, our residents will be left without a voice and without any legal basis to scrutinise future developments. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. And Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too will be supporting the adoption of the local plan. Having said that, I suspect there's nobody in this chamber that are happy with 590 houses per year throughout the time of this plan. None of us are happy with it, but that is the judgment of the inspector that what we should have to provide. And we can't keep on changing inspectors till we find one that actually wants to do what we want to do. I too, with others, don't quite understand the expert highway opinions that we got concerning the sustainability of the road network for the A31, 281 and the 2128. But that is what we've got, and that is the evidence that was before the inspector. I do know, as others have said, the hard work that officers have put in to ensure that we legally comply, and also the policy portfolio holders and the executive who've done the same. I have to say I get great comfort from the inspector's report on pages 34 and 35 when he concludes that this plan is sound, provided the main modifications that he recommended are adopted. And what is important is that we have complied with the law so far as the inspector's concerned, whatever Natural England may have to say, or Councillor Hyman. The fact of the matter is the inspector says it is sound, that we have complied with the law. And I see from the executive minutes of today that judicial review was raised as a last-minute throw of the dice from others. There's always a risk that someone might do that. We've had advice, as I see from this these agenda or these minutes, and I think it's far more important that we have a plan in place and we don't go on any further with a vacuum, and that we get on with it and adopt this plan. We can move on then to part two, we can move on to the rest to protect this borough. So, Mr. Mayor, I support what a lot of my fellow councillors have said, particularly Councillor Band and others, and think this is something which we must, whether we like it or not, adopt it for the benefit of this borough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. And Councillor Storey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, as you're aware, I took over the portfolio of planning just last year, and in fact the section which deals with the local plan only in December. So I would like to say thank you, reiterating what lots of other people have said, to the officers, most of whom are here this evening, and particularly to my predecessor as portfolio holder, Councillor Adams, and I thank him for his good wishes and for all his hard work over the years. It's been a long process. Back to 2002 was our last plan. I'd like to confirm what Councillor Frost said, that when Councillor Follows was complaining about our local plans, the 2007 plan was a Liberal Democrat plan and was failed just as dismally as anything else. In 2013, I was a member of this council, and I remember sitting in this council chamber discussing housing numbers. And we had an agreement with the government's South East Regional Office of a figure of about 250 per year. A local consultation with members of the public, Councillor Isherwood reminded me today, suggested that 157 was more than enough for the borough. Well, I'm sorry, but when that came for examination and we put in, I think, 230, it was laughed out of the chamber. And the inspector at that point thought that we needed more like 700. The decision today is, do we accept and adopt this plan? It's not, do we like this little bit? Do we like that little bit? Could we change it here? Could we change it there? It's this or nothing. Can I say to Councillor Hargreaves that if she looks at the inspector's report in paragraphs 101 and 102, she'll see where it deals with, the inspector deals with the matter of phasing of houses in Farnham and also the requirement for Sang. And for Councillor Hyman, could we have a worse plan? Certainly we could. And I believe that if we don't adopt this one, then we certainly will get a worse plan, because the Secretary of State will do what he has done with other councils who failed to adopt their plan and imposed one from the top. So, what are the plus points? We move from developer-led to plan-led. It allows us to move forward on Local Plan Part 2. And I can reassure Councillor Frost that Mr Parrott will have some work to do in dealing with Part 2. It allows us to move forward on local plans, local neighbourhood plans in our towns and parishes. It allows us to move forward on SIL and bring in much needed money for infrastructure improvements. And it's a basis of strategy not just on housing. Look at the agenda. You'll see there's leisure, there's tourism, there's environment. It's all part of a greater strategy. I've got 8 seconds left. If you don't pass this today, we will have the new NPPF to cope with and also the Secretary of State imposing a solution.
Thank you, Councillor Storey. And I have next Councillor Mulliner.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I strongly support adoption. I think I might make 3 observations. No one's really commented on the background, apart from Councillor Follows complaining about previous attempts. In the time I've been on the council, we've seen one major change in national perception, and that is the admission there's a national housing shortage, which has unsurprisingly driven government thinking ever since. The landscape has changed considerably. As has been pointed out, the South East Plan of blessed memory had far smaller ambitions for us than the National Planning Policy Framework, which came in 2013. And although I wasn't impressed by the way that our 2013 plan was not put together well enough to survive more than a day in front of the inspector, one could only have sympathy for the changing landscape, which was making the officers' lives much more difficult than it might have been. I was fairly involved in the transport aspect of this plan, and that persuaded me just how law-bound and complicated and thoroughly intricate is the business of preparing a local plan. The rules that you have to follow, the people whose advice you have to take, these are not choices we make, they are imposed on us. And seen from the government's point of view, without a framework which people have to follow, would be complete chaos. Indeed, those who think that local authorities have had too much power over the past 20 years to prevent houses being built use that as a main argument why they do need to see such impulsion from the top to get houses built. Inevitably, none of us in a rural borough like this are enthusiastic about great house building. But I think we have to accept there is a fundamental compromise between what you can achieve and what you like, and what you have to accept from on high. So I think, as others have said, it is far better to have some measure of control than none, and I see this as very much the least bad option. There are plenty worse ones available. But I'll finish with one sentiment which I know Councillor Macleod agrees with me on. The biggest canard in planning is to accuse a local planning authority of under-delivery. It is an absurdity. We build very few houses, well, we do on land that we own, but 95% plus depends upon the private building sector putting brick on brick. If there is under-delivery, that is where the blame lies. And it is annoying in the extreme when inspectors, who understand this perfectly well, nonetheless have to behave and pretend as if it is our responsibility for houses not being built. We have granted, and other councils have granted, a huge number of planning permissions over the past 5 years. If the houses are not appearing, look elsewhere for the cause. And sadly, the private sector is profit-led. What a surprise. And on the whole, house prices go up with time rather than down. And that is why they have an insatiable temptation to delay delivering houses. Let us hope that in the new era that will change, but forgive me if I remain a trifle cynical. But we should definitely adopt this plan, and the adverse comments that we've heard have been singularly uncompelling. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Mulliner. And finally, I have Councillor Ramsdale.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you all those of you who contributed already, much of which I agree with, and I'll be seeking not to repeat those thoughts, except, of course, to say a big thank you and well done to all the officers and the members responsible for us getting to the place we are now, where we've got a sound plan that we can put forward and push forward on. Frankly, I'm amazed that some of our colleagues in this chamber think that we should seek a deferment or seek rushing off to challenge Natural England, whose views on those subjects I certainly take to heart more than I would Councillor Hyman's, although I do hear Councillor Hyman's more often. And Councillor MacLeod, you and I have worked well on a number of projects, but I won't be marching up the hill behind you to try and take on central government on this one. You know, we are where we are. The time spent to look and scrutinise, observe, try and change what was happening in this document is not now at the last minute. It was in all the sessions that different people here have attended. I was just talking to Councillor Isherwood earlier today about how he was at every day of the hearing and was participating, arguing with, evidencing officers, arguing with the inspector. Others amongst us have spent detailed hours reviewing the documents, the schmar on the analysis, challenging the consultant that came up with it, that he was getting his numbers wrong. You know, but those pieces of evidence are then have accumulated on us. And of course, you know, we all have reservations, so I'm just not sure that if we were to change the plan, we'd find the same changes that we'd all make. So that scrutiny's been done over the time period. We now face a clear decision. This is not a time when we can offer suggestions back to Elizabeth Sims and her colleagues on, can't we do this, can't we do that, in the way we very often can at a scrutiny-type meeting. It's this plan or nothing. Indeed, if we go for the nothing option, the plan can be used by developers as a source of technical knowledge and decisions to support arguments both at the initial hearing with the council and at appeal. And I dread to think how difficult it would be for quotes from one inspector to persuade another inspector that the first one was right and therefore we're going to get whatever the developer wants. I totally agree with Councillor Foryszewski when she says, no part 1, then no part 2. Thus no contribution of infrastructure, community infrastructure levy, none of the pounds that come with that to help local causes and activities. And certainly none of the protection measures that the plan contains. Councillor Follows, I do wish for this to go through. I do wish to have the protection it offers me. And yes, I regret some of the things that have happened in the past. You weren't here, I wasn't here for much of it either. But for example, if we underdeliver, as was mentioned, and we don't achieve the housing numbers that are set out, well, that's the target we've got to achieve. And with no plan, we'll have the developers knocking on our door saying, that nice green field there, yes, the one you said you didn't want, but the plan wasn't accepted, well, we think that'd be a great site. And just like the Baker Oats field in my ward, the developer could get it. And he could get that green field near to you. So let's go for the protection, be confident about what we've got, and thank all those who've got us to where we are now. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ramsdale. Well, I have no further speakers, so Lido, would you like to sum up?
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I will keep this brief because colleagues have spoken, the portfolio holder has spoken at length. I think what we need to remember is that the inspector concluded that the plan meets all the tests of legal compliance. And as I've said, that can be seen very clearly in the inspector's report on page 34, paragraph 141. So in answer to queries raised by Councillor Hyman, I think that, along with the comprehensive answer and response that came from the portfolio holder, hopefully helps him to understand those points. And to the points raised by Councillor Hargreaves about Farnham, yes, indeed, there are challenges around the borough, but especially in Farnham. And again, I think Councillor Storey summed that up very well. But I think let's move to the real crux of the matter tonight. And that is, when we come to this vote, we have a choice. Do we leave our residents defenceless? Do we have no proper policies? Or do we move forward? Do we have a plan in place? Do we therefore move forward and implement SIL, which will allow us to actually start to really address some of the infrastructure issues that we have, allow us to help, and that's also filtered down for use by by our towns and parishes. We have a very clear decision before us tonight. Do we take back control? That is what you are voting on tonight. And let me hope, and I would commend this plan to Council and urge all members to support it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Leader, on this very important matter, are you going to ask for a recorded vote?
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I would like to ask for a recorded vote, and I believe I have a seconder.
Pleased to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor? Sorry?
Are there 5 members in support?
Sorry, I'll in support. Well,
Okay.
Yes.
That's a yes.
Right, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members, when I call out your name, please say whether you wish to vote for, vote against or abstain. Thank you. Councillor Brian Adams?
For.
Mike Band?
For.
Andrew Bolton?
For.
Maurice Byam?
For.
Kevin Denis?
Abstain.
Patricia Ellis?
For.
David Else?
For.
Jenny Else?
For.
Paul Follows?
Abstain.
Mary Foryszewski?
For.
John Fraser. Pat Frost.
4.
Michael Goodridge. 4. Tony Gordon-Smith.
4.
Ged Hall.
4.
Jill Hargreaves. 4. Val Henry. 4. Christian Hesse.
4.
Mike Hodge.
4.
Nicholas Holder.
4.
David Hunter.
4.
Jerry Hyman.
Against.
Mr Mayor.
4.
Peter Isherwood.
4.
Anna James.
4.
Carol King.
4.
Robert Knowles.
4.
Denise Leigh.
4.
Martin Leigh.
4.
Denis Leigh.
4.
Andy Macleod.
Abstain.
Tom Martin.
4.
Stephen Mulliner.
4.
Nabil Nazir.
4.
Libby Piper.
4.
Julia Potts.
4.
Sam Pritchard.
4.
Wyatt Ramsdale.
4.
David Round.
4.
Richard Seaborn.
4.
Chris Storey.
4.
Liz Townsend.
4.
Bob Upton.
4.
Liz Wheatley.
4.
And Nick Williams. Nick Williams? Thank you. Thank you, members. There were 12 members absent, 3 abstentions, 1 vote against, and 41 votes in favour. So the recommendations are agreed.
Those recommendations, therefore, are carried. We will now have a short adjournment for 5 minutes. So if we could return at 8:20, please.
It didn't take as long as everyone thought, I think.
No, but I think it's a good idea
Just
to have a
just
break.
to clear up the
Yeah.
public gallery.
Yeah.
Oh. See, we didn't miss you.
Right, the next item on the agenda is the budget. Leader, please introduce the budget to the council.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members, officers and members of the public. I propose the annual budget for Waverley Borough Council and I have a seconder. I am pleased to put before the Council this evening a robust and prudent budget that has been produced under challenging financial circumstances. I will shortly ask the portfolio holder for finance to draw out the main headlines. This budget is proposed by a Conservative administration that cares about Waverley's community. The budget is based on a sound and sensible medium-term financial strategy that aims to not only protect vital services into the future, but also to improve our offer to residents by being more innovative and collaborative in the way that we operate. We are an ambitious council, and to achieve our aspirations, we need the right staff and the right resources. I'm delighted that we have appointed Tom Horwood as Waverley's new Chief Executive, and he will be leading the charge with our restructured director team to ensure that we have the right talent, skills and motivation in our dedicated staff for the council to achieve great things for our communities in the future. I am immensely proud of what this council and this Conservative administration has achieved over the year, and I want to mention some of the main successes. I am absolutely thrilled that the Brightwell scheme is now set to be delivered and unconditional contracts are now in place between Waverley, the developer and the funder. Yeah. This is a transformative deal for the council, a major milestone for Farnham, the surrounding area and for the council. A multi-million-pound regeneration scheme of a large rundown part of that town and a major boost to the local economy. This is a significant opportunity to give the residents of Farnham new shops, restaurants, a cinema and leisure space. It brings with it 800 plus jobs and 239 much needed homes to Farnham, a huge boost, as I say, to the local economy. Through thick and thin, this Conservative administration has worked to make this happen, and we can all be really proud of this achievement. When we say we will deliver, that is exactly what we do. Now we're talking about the budget tonight, and this major Brightwell scheme is also about supporting Waverley's finances, now and in the future. Waverley received more than £3 million last week, with more to come, plus significant infrastructure spending in the town. In addition, once completed, this scheme is estimated to boost the council's income by in excess of £750,000 per annum. This really will ensure that we can transform our finances positively for the future. Earlier this evening, members adopted Local Plan Part 1. This too is a major step, not just towards taking back control of development in the borough, but in now allowing us to further shape the future of our borough through neighbourhood plans, place shaping, and the implementation of the all-important Community Infrastructure Levy. With the new senior executive structures in place, we can now really focus on shaping and strengthening our external relationships with Surrey County Council, South East Councils, the CCGs and housing associations. The landscape has changed dramatically for local authorities, and now is the time we need to work collaboratively through shared services, partnership working, economies of scale, and really work at ways to access grants and other forms of government funding in association with organisations such as the LEP. We can achieve so much more for our community by joining forces with other public and private organisations who also have residents' best interests at the forefront. Now, much work has been done by the portfolio holders for economic development, engaging with businesses through the Chambers of Commerce, and we're now focused on developing and strengthening our relationships with the town and parish councils. These organisations are at the heart of our community, and effective joined-up working is really important. Our budget has been significantly bolstered by our property investment strategy, and Councillor Hall will cover this crucial part of our business in more detail later. We have approached this in a sensible and measured way, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Investment Advisory Board and also the Value for Money Overview and Scrutiny Committee for their work, helping us as we've developed our approach and ensuring sound governance. My thanks also to the officers who have secured for us some excellent property acquisitions over the past year, allowing us to develop a portfolio across the borough that secures office space, jobs, and, in addition, gives Waverley a significant income stream. In order to protect both our core frontline services and to maintain our significant support to our partner community organisations, we are proposing a range of savings and efficiency measures within the council. At a time of high customer demand and reduced government funding, we're also proposing a 2.99% increase in council tax, which is just below CPI inflation on a Band D council tax, which is a rise of 10 pence per week. And I'm sure you will all agree, excellent value for money. Looking to the coming year, we have procurements on a number of our major service contracts: bin collection, grounds maintenance, street cleaning, and the maintenance of our all-important 5,000 plus council homes. In total, more than £10 million each year on these contracts. And whilst inevitably there are risks attached, it's a significant opportunity for us to listen to our customers and secure good value for money for the council for many years to come. So we are proposing a solid, deliverable financial strategy that will take us into the future, built on efficiency and innovation, not short-term fixes or raiding of the reserves. Mr. Mayor and members, I would now like to just speak briefly on the housing budget. We're committed to improving our council homes and providing new affordable homes in the borough, which are much needed for our residents and their families. We've delivered 37 new homes ourselves over the last 3 years, and currently we have 60 more under construction in Godalming, Cranley and Shamley Green. This is in addition to the multi-million-pound improvement programme at Oxford Ridge. We've also continued to work with housing associations and developers to ensure many more homes are provided in the borough. And of course, the Brightwell scheme itself in Farnham will add a further 72 affordable homes to this, right in Farnham town centre. Again, we've had to apply a 1% rent reduction on the instruction of the government. And whilst this has limited the amount of money that we can reinvest in our council homes, the comprehensive review of the HRA finances that we carried out earlier in the year has enabled us to realign the HRA, minimising impact on our tenants. I'm pleased to report that tenant satisfaction has improved in many areas of the service. And I'd like to thank the Housing Portfolio Holder, the Housing Overview and Scrutiny Committee, our housing officers, the Tenants Panel and the Tenants Scrutiny Panel for their excellent collaborative working over the year. And finally, Mr Mayor, my thanks to the Overview and Scrutiny Committees for their robust scrutiny of the budget. This is an important part of setting our budget, and the reports before you tonight include their comments. I'd like to thank all our heads of service, Mr Clark and the finance team for their hard work and commitment in delivering both the General Fund and the HRA budget proposals before you. And members, again, in summary, I would emphasise that these budget proposals seek to deliver a balanced and robust financial strategy, investment in our key services, all-important protection of our core frontline services and support to community organisations, and significant investment in income-generating projects. This Conservative administration firmly believes that these budget proposals represent outstanding value for our council taxpayers in monetary terms and in the all-important service delivery. And I commend this budget to council. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Hall, would you now like to second and then introduce agenda item 8?
Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, Waverley has had a few very tough years on the financial front. A combination of price inflation pushing up costs, changes in recycling funding and government grant reductions have all led to a projected medium-term shortfall of about 2.7 million over the next 3 years. However, last year, rather than cut services to our residents, we took the unanimous decision to raise revenues and identify savings. We set up the Investment Advisory Board, which identified commercial investment opportunities and added to our income to the tune of almost £750,000. Each portfolio was asked to make savings, and each line of capital expenditure was scrutinised. As a consequence, this year we are in a very different position. Today we can present a balanced budget, which allocates money for our community safety, maintains funding for our community organisations, and allows for the measured expansion and improvement of our services right across the borough. We have raised revenues on planning services and will be investing the lion's share back into it to improve the delivery of that service to our residents. There is no change in the council tax support scheme, and, unlike last year, there is no requirement this year to raise car parking charges. Furthermore, our capital spending will remain at around the £2 million mark to maintain and renew services and infrastructure through the borough. There will, as always, be a mid-year review of our position in the summer, and I must remind all members that substantial risks still exist. We are not out of the woods yet. Therefore, we will continue to strengthen and grow the Investment Advisory Board to seek out new opportunities to increase our revenues further. We will continue to campaign hard against a negative government grant, and we will continue to examine our operational costs in search of efficiencies. As you heard from the leader, the Brightwells development has gone unconditional. It's been a very long road, but we did get there. It will provide over 800 jobs, 230 homes, new shops, restaurants, cafes, £2 million in Section 106 money to be spent on infrastructure and extended services in our community. And when built, the extra revenue to Waverley will be in the region of £800,000 a year, securing our services for years to come. On the HRA, as members are aware, there was a review reviewed in depth last year, and it has a robust and deliverable long-term plan in place. For the next financial year, we're required to reduce rents again by 1%, which obviously leads to a reduction in our total revenues. However, given the reduction in revenue, we have still managed to spend £21 million on new builds in the last 3 years, with a further £15 million proposed in the budget report. We have managed to freeze staff costs, and we have confidence that our capital reserves will last between 3 and 7 years. The HRA in the future may need to borrow to build, but until there is financial clarity on the rental income, this currently remains on hold. The HRA is broadly in good financial shape. We eagerly await central government's formal decision on rent rises. Once we have clarity on this, it is likely a full review will be conducted to determine what level of resources can be reallocated within the current budget. Mr. Mayor, just to say a word on the council tax rise. The total bandee for Waverley is £1,882, of which Waverley just takes £177, or around 10%. Surrey County Council takes roughly 75% of that amount. This year, Waverley has increased by 3%, compared with Townsend parishes, which have increased by approximately 6.5%, Surrey, who have increased by 6%, and the police, who have increased by 5.3%. Our rise is therefore modest and in line with our requirements and inflationary pressures. So today, Mr. Mayor, we're in a position to present a balanced budget. And I would like to personally thank the officers and the members who have worked tirelessly to make this happen. It has been tough. There have been challenges. There are still risks. But with your support, members, this Conservative administration is ready to face anything that comes our way and fight to protect the services that we provide to our residents. The proposed budget is balanced, fair and robust, and I urge you all to support it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have the pleasure of presenting the budget opposition position. Robust and prudent, we've been told. I shall come to that in a short while. I cannot possibly ignore the opportunity to mention, as it has been done by the leader, the issue of the East Street development. I think the intention is to commence tomorrow with some tree cutting. I'm a little bit surprised that the contractors has gone unconditional, because I find absolutely no record that Waverley has been through the Section 123 Local Government Act process of advertising the disposal of land. So I think there might be a problem with that, and although I doubt that it would lead to a challenge, that would be possible. It brings up the question of best value, and that's where a lot of residents have their problems. They see us doing a lot of work, or perhaps they don't see us, but they know that a lot of work is done in putting together a budget and trying to achieve a balanced budget. But they see Waverley spending £3 million on the extension, an extension to a memorial hall, which didn't need changing or wrecking. It needed £300,000 spending on it to bring it up to standards, because it hasn't had money spent on it for a long time. And £3 million would buy us a veritable mansion. Well, perhaps not quite a mansion around here, but nevertheless it would certainly buy a property which we could make into a very nice health centre or whatever. But no, not going to be considered. The decision was taken years ago. Disposing of 4 hectares of land at Farnham, when we've paid for 0.4 of a hectare, land assembly, we paid £4 million plus for that yet we're disposing it of £3 million for 10 times more land. A quarter of our town centre being given away, in effect, with uncertain income coming in from it in the future, maybe never. It's interesting, as you say that this is going to be delivered. I understand the Bat House consent expired yesterday. I know that the design of the scheme is not yet complete, and we're still awaiting further planning applications. So, deliverability, there's another question mark. We've heard all this before over many years. This is going to happen and that is going to happen, and well, it hasn't. But getting it to this stage was certainly an event for some people. As far as the budget is concerned, robust and prudent, yes, I think it is. I think the Conservative group have actually done quite a good job on this budget. I think officers have done a very good job. There are questions, and certainly I'm not particularly happy about the idea of the 3% increase. I think any increases are driving inflation, and we, as community leaders, I suppose, should not be doing that. I think really it's a matter of looking at the principles, because this country is driven by entrepreneurs and small businesses growing, and the best way to build a business is to do it on the cheap and to do it with low overheads, not on the cheap necessarily, but low overheads help because you can invest more and more of whatever income you have coming in. That's the principle. We should be keeping people's overheads down, and all the time that we are increasing council tax, increasing business rates, whatever. Okay, it helps make life easier for the public services, but it makes things more difficult for people who are trying to invest every spare penny that they've got. So, I will certainly be working with members over this summer and the coming years in order to try and reduce our council tax, if that's at all possible, as other forward-thinking councils have succeeded in doing. I am, as far as the housing revenue account is concerned, yes, spending multi-million pounds, £21 million already, and £15 million more on housing. A lot of that is up at Oxford Ridge, and we appreciate that there's a regeneration element in that, so it's not all directly spent on housing, let's say. But what we're never told, and what it always worries me and it rather surprises people, is just how much in total is being spent and how many further houses are we getting for that. And I have a feeling that the answer isn't particularly, doesn't look particularly well upon Waverley, because we just can't get an answer. But if someone would like to tell us how
Mr.
many
Mayor,
additional
could I
homes...
put a point of order, please? It's my understanding that Councillor Hyman is treading on territory than which he may have a pecuniary interest.
I think that's ridiculous, but if you want to go down that line, Mr. Mayor...
well, perhaps you'd better move on from that subject.
Okay, that's strange. Okay. I can't understand the pecuniary interest part, but there you go. As far as the rest of the HRA, the budget looks very good, and I know a lot of hard work has gone into this. By members, yes, but mostly by staff, and I think they've done a very good job in producing a balanced budget. I am, have been through it. I am particularly upset about one thing, I must say. Because it's that element of, if we turn to page 30 of our documents, please, Mr. Mayor, and we turn to line 7, and we're talking about zoo licences, Mr. Mayor, and of course all those people at home are wondering, do we need a licence for all those apes at Waverley? We've got zoo licences at line 7, and the information in there I've picked up twice that is untrue, false information. We haven't put the price down this year, we put it down last year, and I'd like that corrected, Mr. Mayor, because we haven't... I don't know why I should have to bring these matters up, but of course I'm speaking tongue-in-cheek. But if we could make sure that when we point things out that things are wrong, if we could just correct it through the documents. The fact is that it was changed from a three-year to a 4-yearly licence last year, and so there's no change this year in the price of a zoo licence. It's a very important matter in Waverley, as you all understand. I'm being tongue-in-cheek, but Mr. Mayor, This budget is a good budget. I'm not going to turn around and say, recommend that people vote against it. I see no reason to do so whatsoever, but in future it'd be nice if we can start to bring down the overheads for our residents. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. There will now be one general budget debate on agenda item 8, and any amendments should be moved later when the recommendations are put. The recommendations for agenda items 8A to 8C of the Executive from its meeting on the 6th of January are set out in each report. I have one speaker so far, Councillor Goodridge. Ramsdale.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wondered whether tonight I should put my black cap on for the demise in this budget of the revenue support grant, which is going to be reduced in the budget period to 0. I think 5 or 6 years ago, others will correct me, it was 3.8 million. The fact that this council has, over those years, cut expenditure, dealt with income, and over a large number of those years, not increased the council tax, I think is highly commendable. I'm pleased to hear that Councillor Hyman thinks that we've done a good job and it's a good budget, but then says that we should perhaps not put up the council tax and, if anything, reduce it. And, of course, the opposition never seem to come up with the ideas of where they can save, for example, 278,000 if we didn't put the council tax up. Where would they cut the expenditure from? We never get that. We just get it would be jolly nice not to, and in future years it would be nice if we could reduce it, wouldn't it? But someone has got to come up with an alternative budget, and I don't think for many years, and I've been on this council for some time, have we actually had an alternative budget that the opposition has put forward. Now, I'm not encouraging them to do so next year, but who knows? But it's great to come up with these remarks about, wouldn't it be nice if? We've got to actually get to the facts about how that can actually happen. I would like to congratulate the portfolio holder and the executive and all the officers for their combined efforts to ensure that we have a balanced budget, and I will most definitely be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. Councillor Ramsdale.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I find myself in a very unusual situation on this particular item. I find that Councillor Hyman and I are in complete agreement that we've got two excellent budgets and no need of massive change. I share Councillor Goodwin's concern that we don't seem to be receiving any specific suggestions, yet you did say there were cuts we could make in overheads. Well, I'm sure Councillor Hall would be delighted to know just where and when and how. Personally, I'd like to particularly thank you for the reminder about this great project at Memorial Hall. And in particular, for me, personally, the Goodridge Centre is moving out of a very cramped, run-down state in the centre of town out to this fantastic hall with excellent facilities. Goodridge Centre, when I used to take my mother there, it was a one-way road full of minibuses and parked cars, and you were sort of driving down, struggling to get someone who didn't know quite why she was there or was where she was going into this little pokey hall, and then going back to your car to find if you weren't blocking somebody else in, then you were blocked in and you were reversing out onto a main road to get out. Compared to the hall, where you've got a nice one-way system round, drop-off, massive open space, which was largely unused during the daytime when the elderly people will be there, because of course its principal use is for junior people and sporting activity. And Councillor Hyman, you must have forgotten what you'd just been told. There's an income stream of £800,000 per year analysed and expected to come out of East Street or Brightwells. Very convenient to forget things like that. But thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm totally in support of this budget. I'd like to congratulate the the portfolio holder on he's achieved, and Mr Clark and Mr Vickers. In particular, for the head of the service, I'd like to thank him for the improvements he's made to our benefits service. I understand there's a budget saving for next year of £70,000, having applied systems thinking, I believe, was the analysis. And I believe that that can be commended to other parts of the council to have a look-see on how they could apply it. And as you said, Councillor Hall, fantastic news on the generation of income, and it's good to see that we'll be adding the Brightwells development to that. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Councillor Ramsdale. Councillor Frost.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Mayor. Thank you for your comments, Mr Hyman. Those I heard. And particularly that you thought it was a nice, balanced budget. Then you proceeded to actually knock down all the achievements that this council had made to get there. And it would be nice if we have an achievement that you and your group could in fact support. And as somebody who was involved about 20 years ago, it must be, it seems like 90, in choosing the developer for the East Street scheme, I am absolutely thrilled that we're going to be getting on with it. And it's the positives out of it we need to look at. There'll be a lot of negatives because somebody will ring up and say, I'm sure that tree's got a TPO on it, or I'm sure this and I'm sure that. But at the end of the day, it is going to benefit the town. It won't please everyone. Nothing in Farnham ever pleases everybody, but at least it will be there and we will have an achievement. And I hope I'm still around for the opening. However, the budget's a good one. And I think we need to look at some of the things in the budget. And what I like about the budget is that all the ONS committees have had an opportunity to put in their voice and to say what they think. And we seem to have glossed over the fact that despite this very difficult time financially, we are still supporting with grants our voluntary organisations. And that's not a statutory duty for us, but we're still doing it, and we should be very proud of ourselves that we're still managing to achieve this. The Housing Subcommittee, the ONS, which I vice chair, has worked extremely hard on various things, including customer satisfaction and the repair service, and we have worked well with the tenants panel and tenants and everybody there to achieve something that we think is going to be great. And the redevelopment that is taking place at Oxfordridge is another great thing that we have done. And we must not forget how good we've been, because we've all worked at it, and sometimes we have to make decisions which we would prefer not to make because they're difficult. But that's our job. That's why we're elected. That's why we're here. So thank you, Executive. Thank you to all of those on the ONS committees who have played their part. And thank you, Mr. Hyman, for acknowledging it is a good budget. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Frost. Councillor Band.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to join in the congratulations of the Executive and the officers in producing this balanced budget. It's a major challenge, and it's a challenge that we recognised in the Value for Money ONS meetings. What we also recognised, and though it's not reported here, that the future years were likely to be even greater challenge. And in that context, the news on Brightwells is immensely rewarding because it clearly will close one of the major gaps which has been projected in future years in terms of the general fund revenue stream. And I think we need to congratulate the strategy which this council and administration has adopted in the way it has dealt with the new homes bonus. Many councils have taken the new homes bonus as a substitute for revenue support grant and put it supporting their revenue costs. This council and this administration has gone another route and put it decidedly aside to support capital projects which lead to revenue streams in their own right. And I think the way that we have seen this significant elimination and now a negative prospects of a negative revenue support grant, and the Treasury also cutting back on some of their promises on the new homes bonus, only reinforces what a wise and prudent decision that was to deal with the new homes bonus in that particular way. I also think in terms of the HRA, our villages, our towns are beginning to benefit, not only from the work which our developers do, but from the housing that our own construction work is putting in place. In my particular parish, Wannish, which includes Shamley Green, this administration, by the end of this financial year, will have built 11 new affordable houses. This is the first time affordable houses in this village have been created in the last 20 years. It's a notable achievement, and I congratulate the administration on what they're doing. And in closing, Mr. Mayor, I cannot help but believe I should congratulate the new Deputy Leader, Councillor Hall, and thank the past Deputy Leader, Councillor Tom Martin, for the work he's done for this administration up to now. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Band. I next have Councillor King.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Mayor. This time last year, I didn't think I'd be standing up today saying how well the HRA had done and how pleased I am that we now face a much more secure financial future than we did. This hasn't been achieved easily. It's been hard work. We've restructured. We haven't finished yet. We're still restructuring. The teams have worked phenomenally hard. We've managed to keep our salary bill exactly the same as last year, which is quite some achievement. But this has all been achieved by an awful lot of hard work by people who I'd like to acknowledge. And at the risk of sounding a bit like an Oscar speech, I'd particularly like to single out Peter Vickers and his finance team, because they've had to really get to grips this year. Well, and in the past, but particularly so this year, with change of staff in actually helping to really direct and drive the HRA. I'm pleased that we're going to be able to return to bathroom and kitchen replacement works, which will help to keep us on the decent homes trajectory that we were on before the government reduced our finances by the 1% reduction in rent for 4 years. So hopefully that will now be in a good place to be. The new homes delivery will continue under Louisa Blundell and her team, and they're to be congratulated, as Councillor Band has said, on actually delivering some really super new homes of good design and good quality. Our tenants all deserve decent homes. They deserve healthy homes to live in, and hopefully that is what we are trying to achieve. And I would like to thank particularly Hugh Wagstaff, who heads our team of the housing team, because he's done a tremendous amount of work this year. He's very driven, and it's been wonderful, and I appreciate it most sincerely. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Follows, I think you wish to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the councillors. I'll just try and keep this very short, and I would absolutely hate to offend Councillor Frost or any others for any appallingly youthful grandstanding, so I'll try and keep it to a minimum. As a new member, I've spent some time with senior officers to make sure I was as much up to speed as possible with this in the light of my fairly recent election. And I just want to thank them immensely for their time and for their patience with, no doubt, some extremely silly questions from me in the last couple of days. Challenging financial circumstances, robust and prudent. I was generally afraid the leader was about to say strong and stable, so I'm really pleased you didn't. Certainly with Brightwells, as with other investments, increasing our exposure to external market risk does moderately concern me. I think the assumption of revenue streams from those areas, when we see high street shop closures, particularly restaurants in recent days, elsewhere, does lead to some questions, I think, about where we're getting some of that money to address that shortfall in the long run. So much of the addressing of that budget shortfall is dependent on those returns meeting expectations. I think that's something that, although I agree it's good that we're making those investments, and it does seem to be quite solid, it is something that we've got to keep an eye on and continue to monitor. Let's be fair, local government is a squeeze by 1,000 cuts at the moment, and we are today having to raise council tax here, as has been done in Surrey and in Godalming Town Council. The cause of that squeeze actually comes from national government in many different forms, and it's all contributing to the situation that we are now in all levels of local government. With the exception of 6 Farnham residents and myself, all of you are members of that party, and you all stand for and get elected from that party. Every Surrey MP represents that party. There's a risk of further austerity in policy in policies. Risk looms large over this budget and in the future, which we need to make sure we address. We all can't shrug off and not blame the national government when it's convenient, and I would like some members, either in this chamber now or at some point in the future, to explain to me and to the residents of Waverley what they're doing to challenge their party nationally on these subjects, and particularly what our local MP is doing to address these subjects, to actually to fix the underlying problem of local government funding. In general, the position we're in is not an enviable one. In a similar situation in Godalming Town Council, I did vote along with the budget, and I intend to do so tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. I don't have any other speakers. No. So, Leader, would you like to sum up?
Mr Mayor, thank you. I think the majority of questions that were raised by Councillor Hyman earlier have been covered by other members, so I will keep it very, very brief. The Section 151 officer, Mr Clark, is bound under statute to issue a supporting statement when we submit our budget, and he needs to be able to, in that statement, make the assurance and assertion that the budget before people is prudent and robust. And this budget before you gives that assurance. Therefore, I commend the budget to Council. Thank you.
Members, there is a requirement for a recorded vote to be taken at budget meetings. Are members happy to consider all 3 sections as one vote? Very right. Can I invite anyone who wishes to vote against any or all of the recommendations to indicate? Are there any abstentions? In that case, can we take it then that the budget is approved unanimously? Very good. That was easier than I was expecting. Please now return to the agenda and item 9. The report of the remuneration panel. The report of the independent remuneration panel is attached at page 83. Do I have any speakers? Councillor Hyman.
Thank you. Very briefly, I don't think there's any reason to object to this, but I do understand that the 3 gentlemen who do this for us are volunteers, and I'd just very much like to thank them for what they do. Mr McLennan, Neil McLennan and Ken Kenton, Robert Mattock, and just like to say thank you very much indeed to them. I take it that's on behalf of other members, so we don't need 57 people to say the same thing. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Nobody else? In that case, there is one recommendation that the report be considered and accepted. Is that agreed? Agreed. So, moving on to item 10, minutes of executive and committees. Minutes of the Leader of Council to present, please.
Mr Mayor, thank you. I'm pleased to present the minutes of the executive held on the 6th of February, and I believe I have a seconder.
Pleased to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There are a number of recommendations as part 1 of this agenda. And the first item, which is item 92, which is the financial strategy, has actually been dealt with as part of the overall budget that came to members earlier this evening. So I move to item 93, which is the Treasury Management Framework, and I believe Councillor Hall wishes to speak to that item. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Treasury Management Framework is actually fairly straightforward. It's the way in which we manage the Treasury, and what we're required to do every year is to have the framework reapproved. Unfortunately, this has been delayed by central government, so what we're proposing to do is to approve the previous years once again, and then when the changes come out, these will be brought to Council in due course. The Treasury activities are predominantly money market deposits of fairly high credit. There's nothing particularly complex about them. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any other speakers on this? Leader, would you like to sum up?
Mr. Mayor, I think Councillor Hall has covered this very eloquently. I'd like to move to the recommendation with your agreement. Thank you.
Right, members. The recommendation 28 on page 105, is that agreed? Agreed. Moving on to the annual pay policy.
Mr. Mayor, item 94 on the agenda is the annual pay policy, and the Localism Act of 2011 requires that all public authorities publish an annual pay policy statement. And the Council is therefore required to adopt the annual pay policy statement each year and not permitted to depart from the policies that are set out in it. This is very much an administrative policy, but nonetheless an important one that needs to come before Council this evening. And there is again one recommendation with that. Thank you.
Do we have any speakers? No. Right. If you don't wish to add anything, Leader, we will move to the recommendation on page 105. Is that agreed? Agreed. Funding for voluntary sector organisations.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. We've talked earlier in our budget setting about the all-important funding for our voluntary organisations across the borough, and I think we all agree, cross-party, that that is absolutely crucial. Councillor Frost said that we are not bound by statute to fund these organisations. But I think it's worth recognising, and I'm sure that we all do, and you'll all join with me in thanking all the organisations in the borough for all the hard work that they do in providing so many important services to our residents, many of whom are isolated or vulnerable, and without whom those all-important services, you know, they just mean so much to them. So it's really important that we continue with the excellent work that goes from our community team and from the portfolio holders who work with those organisations. My thanks also to all the officers who work so hard. We've got a number of service level agreements in place, certainly with all the major organisations now, which ensures that they really are accountable, and we work with them to ensure that the money that they receive is used appropriately and really used to deliver the services that are required and that we want for our residents. The executive confirmed overall funding of over £680,000. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the Overview and Scrutiny Committees, because I know they've also done a lot of work on this. But I mean, I think realistically, summing this up, it's a huge amount, a very significant amount, and really does demonstrate the commitment of this administration and this council to all our voluntary organisations. And as I say, I personally would like to give them a vote of thanks. Mr. Mayor, there's one recommendation with that item.
Are there any other speakers? In that case, we will move straight to the recommendation on page 111. Is that agreed? Agreed. WBC, present.
Mr Mayor, thank you. Item 96 is the prevent strategy, and I think Councillor Denis wanted to speak to that item. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll keep it very brief. The government's prevent strategy has a number of objectives. It's all part of Contest, which is the national strategy, and prevent is about preventing radicalisation. The document talks about our responsibilities. That's our responsibilities as a council, as members, as contract holders and our volunteers. It's a document that we should be complying with. It's very similar to the safeguarding, which lists about our responsibilities and what we should be doing with any notifications. So I commend my colleagues to support this document. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Denis. Councillor Frost.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I do agree with Councillor Denis. This is a very important part of safeguarding. And I'm not quite sure, so forgive me, members, if you think I know all about this. She's trying to teach me what I already know. But I do feel it's so important that we should consider some additional training or things that we can do as councillors to be aware, ought we to be aware of going into schools and what's happening in schools, etc. I don't want to go into it in some depth, but I do think that we ought to know more about it so that we can talk with confidence within our communities about what prevent means and how this council is trying to help in the fight against terrorism. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further speakers? Sorry. Leader, do you wish to?
Mr Mayor, thank you. I just wanted to come back on the excellent point raised by Councillor Frost, and just to clarify that we will actually be coming out, or Democratic Services, should I say, will be writing out to you with details of training that is planned. As you say, very much needed. Things are changing all the time, and that's something that is really important. So thank you for raising that point.
Right, members, the recommendation 31 is on page 112. Is that agreed? Agreed. Leader, review of scheme of delegation.
Mr Mayor, thank you. Taking us back to April of last year, just to set some context here, we approved at full council and adopted a new scheme of delegation for council. And when we did that, we agreed that the scheme would be monitored and reviewed on a regular basis. And a number of initial amendments were put forward by the Standards Panel back in June of 2017 and subsequently agreed by council. Now, the Standards Panel, led by Councillor Goodridge, met a couple of weeks ago and undertook a further planned review of the scheme. And as a result of that meeting, you have before you a number of further amendments in your papers today. In response to feedback, these include a number of changes relating to planning, and in particular the provision within the scheme for members wishing to call in planning applications for consideration by committee. Can I just say a personal note of thanks to the Standards Panel, who've worked really effectively with officers to put forward what I'm sure members will agree are very sensible and helpful proposals. And you will see from your papers that there are 3 main changes that are being put forward tonight: to give the head of planning a greater degree of general discretion, supporting late call-ins where there are sound planning reasons, that applications that generate 5 or more objection letters or letters of support will not be agreed by way of delegated authority unless the ward member confirms they are happy that is the case, and Thirdly, that for complete clarity, the description of what should go to a joint planning committee that's contained within the council's constitution will also be included within the scheme of delegation. Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Thank you. I have one speaker, Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I would like to thank the Standards Panel for the work they did, and the officers. A lot of what I was going to say has been covered helpfully by the leader, but particularly to draw your attention to page 169 of your papers, which does set out the planning matters. I think this is a very important change. I think the pendulum had swung too far on the scheme of delegation for planning applications that come in our wards, and this hopefully rectifies the situation and gives more clout to ward members to ensure things don't happen unbeknown to them below the radar. So I think I commend the amendments to you and congratulate the executive on endorsing all the alterations that we had put forward. And this is a continuing operation because I think we've asked in 6 months' time, we'll look at it again. And then and if members have any other suggestions on how we can improve things, we are very open to discussion and to consider such matters. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. Anybody else? No? Oh, yes, Councillor Byam.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, this problem of delegation is something that's created quite a lot of angst among many of us, and I brought it up substantially on a few occasions. I'm still a little concerned in the sense that quite often the planning officers are under quite a lot of pressure. They have an extensive workload. 21 days from the time the application, any application is registered. Quite often, I think you'll find the officers actually haven't got down to really understanding what the application is about, and therefore whether they're going to be considering approval or indeed failure. So I'm still feel that it's a tight schedule and doesn't therefore give us the opportunity as members to ask the officers questions about a particular application and get any reasonable, and we're not asking them to tell them exactly what they're doing because that's not our job, but to understand whether it's worthwhile us considering calling in or whether we ought to be doing that. So I think that's just a comment that needs to go back. It can't be answered tonight, I don't think. It's just a concern that I have.
Thank you, Councillor Byam. Yes, Councillor Isherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a word of thanks to the Standards Panel for having listened to many members' comments and producing their report so quickly. I think it's an outstanding report, and I'm most grateful to the Standards Panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Leader, do you wish to add anything? No. In that case, we will move to the recommendation 32 on page 113. Is that agreed? Agreed. Good. We now move on to part 2 items. Item 100 on page 114. Councillor Foryszewski.
Thank you, Chairman. Following on from a very interesting housing forum hosted by Carol King, very informative. Myself and a few other colleagues were at an event yesterday in Guildford, which was, it's the Surrey Community Housing Partnership, and it's looking at community-led housing through a community land trust. And it struck me that what this was all about was people who aren't entitled to social housing but can't afford market housing and getting together and trying to solve their own problem. And now with the register, I was just wondering if there was any merit in how we can get that message across, because I know it was mentioned in the forum yesterday that Hazelmere has created a community group and a community land trust, and it might be of value to have some joined up thinking so they know this register is available and can make best use of it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Foryszewski. And Don't sit down. Item 101, page 114, litter and dog fouling.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and it won't come as any surprise to any of you that I was going to comment on this, because I get a little bit tired of responsible dog owners paying the price for the irresponsible ones. I walk about 20,000 steps every single day, and whilst I do come across the odd dog mess, I come across a lot more litter, and I would like to see litter being more at the top of the agenda than dog fouling, because and what we do about people driving in their cars just discarding litter through their windows, and I think it's an appalling disgrace of bad manners. Now, I just worry a little bit that it's a bit of an easy target here, and I know that it's going to be looked at in some detail, but I don't want this to be seen as a form of clamping on dog owners, and that we make money out of it. It's about getting the message out there, sending the right message out there, and it could be that we do more to target people who drive down, as Smithwood Common Road, the other side is littered of it. I've been behind drivers and they've just rolled down their windows and discarded rubbish at their will. And this is people of varying ages. It's not kids being badly behaved, it's adults disregarding their environment, and I think a clampdown is necessary, but I think we should get our priorities right as to where the real problems are. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Foryszewski. We'll move on to item 102 on page 115, Weyhill Car Park. Councillor Round.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try and be brief. I often speak about car parking. This time it's not to say I hate it, but to support this proposal, this decision that has been made. Weyhill Fairground Car Park is an eyesore. Although people don't like paying to park, I'm sure even in Havesmere people will accept that probably most of the commuters who park there come from way outside Havesmere, and if you want information, outside the borough too. Provided, I hope that we can ensure that parking for the local shop workers is either zero as now or as close to that as possible. I'm pleased also to note in some of the supporting papers that the resurfacing of Weyhill Car Park, which is why we're doing this, will not prejudice any innovative future development plans that may emerge, finally, as a result of neighbourhood plans. But my main point here is to make a plea regarding I support the deregistration process that we're going to go through. And as part of that, one offers another piece of land to take the place of the common land we're deregistering it. And it's the choice of this other piece of land that I would plead with those who execute this decision to think again and hopefully consult locally. This other piece of land is already accessible by the public in that it's unfenced, but no one ever goes there because it's pretty difficult. It's a rubbish piece of near vertical, scrubby tree and bramble-covered land that is very difficult to foresee any use of it in the future at all, I'm afraid. It's far better, in my opinion, and those of others in Havesmere, to revert to the plan in 2012 to swap the land for the town meadow in Tans Lane. Everyone, including I understand us here in Waverley, wants to keep it green, and common land status would help that. The fact that there is already public access need not, I understand, be a deal stopper. I understand that the inspector in these matters has a great deal of discretion. It also doesn't have to be next door, although in fact that land in Tanners Lane is nearer by car than is the proposed piece of land. Above all, may I plead that those who prosecute this, before we part with the fee of £4,900, consult locally as required and recommended by Annex A to the guidance for Section 16 of the Commons Act 2006. Thank you very much. Please consult. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Round. And item 106 on page 116, Councillor Foryszewski, waste contract.
Chairman, Mr Mayor, thank you. I know this is an exempt item, so I won't stray off the subject. But on behalf of the task group, I would like to thank our advisors and the officers, Richard and Calvin and his team. They've done a really excellent job. In particular, Fiona Cameron, that I'm sure my fellow colleagues will agree, done an absolutely brilliant job. And she put together a first-class report that I think puts forward the recommendations very, very clearly. A tremendous amount of work led us to our conclusions. Waste is a universal service that affects every resident in Waverley. It's a high-performing, it's high quality, and we don't want that to change. So I hope the recommendations that we put before you can be taken forward and that you will carry on the good work of making sure that the Borough of Waverley is served at its best, and we keep up the good work of providing one of the very best services that Waverley does at the moment. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Well, I have no further speakers in part two. Leader.
Mr Mayor, thank you. I too, if I may just come back briefly on a couple of the items raised in part two. Thank you from all of the executive for the excellent work done by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, looking at the waste and the waste contracts, and that's given us some real help in terms of a way forward. Councillor Round talked at length about Way Hill, and I would like to reassure him that we are planning to meet with the Town Council, with the Town Clerk, and have made contact with the Town Council so that we can have a discussion as he's asking. Obviously, we're being given advice about the common land and so forth, but that's probably a conversation for another day. And to Councillor Foryszewski's comments about the planned work in terms of enforcing on dog fouling and litter. I know whenever I'm on the doorstep talking to residents, two of the biggest issues they have are dog fouling and litter. It's something people see, it's something they don't like. If you've got young children, the issues that it can raise are horrendous, and it's antisocial behaviour. So we are going to be taking a zero tolerance approach to this. We're not going to go the route, as Councillor Foryszewski so eloquently put it, of clamping, but we will look at ways to deal with this, and we will be going out to consultation across the spring to actually understand where a lot of the real areas of key issue are, and make sure that we can start to shape the proposals, as I say, with input from members and from our residents in the local community. But I see this as an excellent way forward for those irresponsible people out there who are causing a real blight to our borough. Mr Mayor, that concludes my summing up. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Are they agreed? Item 11, minutes of the Licensing and Regulatory Committee. Councillor Patricia Ellis to present.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm pleased to present the minutes of the licensing and regulatory meeting that was held on the 19th of December 2017. Do I have a seconder, please?
Mr Mayor, I'd like to second.
Thank you, Councillor Upton. This item is for noting, and there are no associated, recommendations. That concludes the minutes.
Is that agreed?
Agreed. Thank you. I'm also now pleased to present the minutes of the Licensing and Regulatory Committee that was held on the 15th of January 2018. I believe that I have a seconder.
Mr. Mayor, I second also.
Thank you. Are there any speakers on the Part 1 item relating to the Hackney Carriage and Private Hire Policy Review relating to the Surrey-wide and Waverley consultation?
It appears not.
Thank you. There are two recommendations on page 184.
Are they agreed?
Agreed. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the officers, the members and the residents who, for their hard work, that contributed to the consultation and the policy document. Thank you. I have received no requests to speak on items in part 2 of the minutes, and that concludes my minutes.
Are they agreed?
Agreed. Thank you.
We'll then move on to item 12, which is the minutes of the Standards Panel. Councillor Michael Goodridge to present.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have pleasure in presenting the report of the Standards Panel, the meeting held on the 29th of January 2018, and I have a seconder. There's one item in Part 1 relating to the Audit Committee terms of reference. The Audit Committee themselves looked at their terms of reference and wished to make it more fit for purpose, and the Standards Panel went through it and were happy to endorse those and recommend that those amendments to their terms of reference be put to Council.
Are there any speakers on this item? No. Well, the recommendation is on page 8. Sorry, recommendation 8 is on page 267. Is that agreed?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are two matters in Part 2, one of which, of course, we've dealt with under the executive report. I've had no notice of any questions under Part 2, and that concludes my report.
Are they agreed? Agreed. Right. There is only one more thing, I think, on the agenda. Changes to committee memberships. There have been a number of changes to committee memberships, and these are set out at agenda item 13 for information. Are they noted? I don't think there's any need to exclude the press and public. So that concludes our meeting, but it would be wrong for me to finally bang the hammer without reminding you that Emma McQuillan will be leaving us shortly. She's leaving to organise the Caravan Club and those endless convoys on the holiday routes. Emma, I'm sure we all wish you the very best, and thank you. And thank you for all your hard work, and on a personal note, thank you for all the help you gave me as Chairman of Licensing. So, I'll just remind JPC members, check your emails tomorrow. Time for a drink.
Please rise whilst the Mayor leaves the chamber.